Forward to nationalization of mines and banks, forward.
Julius Malema has just backed Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and behind the scenes, Western governments are scrambling to figure out what will happen next. Two leaders, two countries, one message. Africa will no longer take orders. But what did Malema do that forced the West to take notice? Let's find out. For months, whispers had been growing across Africa's political underground. Julius Malema was watching Burkina Faso, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré was quietly building alliances far beyond his country's borders. Now those whispers have exploded into reality, and the shockwaves are only beginning to spread. This is not a friendship of convenience. It is not an opportunistic photo op crafted for applause. It is a strategic, deliberate act of rebellion against a global system both men have publicly vowed to overturn. Malema, long known for his unfiltered critiques of Western domination, has found in Traoré something rare. A leader willing not only to speak against imperialism, but to act against it. In a world where many African presidents sign foreign deals by day and make defiant speeches by night, Traoré's consistency has become almost revolutionary by itself. He expelled French forces. He turned away Western military advisors. He began restructuring Burkina Faso's economy with one goal: to end foreign dependency at any cost. For Malema, it was a call too powerful to ignore. For Traoré, it was an opportunity too critical to miss. Their alliance was inevitable, forged not in boardrooms or embassies, but in the fires of a shared refusal. A refusal to let Africa be treated as a playground for outsiders. A refusal to let another generation be sold cheap promises in exchange for silent obedience. The decision to make this alliance public, to announce it rather than hide it, is itself a direct challenge. Both men could have met quietly, issued careful statements, and preserved diplomatic ambiguity. Instead, they chose provocation. Malema announced his full support for Traoré before the world. Traoré welcomed him openly as a fellow warrior in a larger continental struggle. Why would they do that? Because they understand a simple truth. The fight for Africa's freedom is psychological before it is political. By standing together openly, by risking condemnation from Washington, Brussels, and even some African capitals, they are not just forging a personal bond, they are sending a signal to millions. You are not alone. You do not have to accept the world as it is. You have leaders who are ready to fight for something real. Already, that signal is being heard. Across social media platforms, Pan-African groups, youth movements, and even some murmurs within government ministries, the excitement is growing. In Johannesburg's streets and Ouagadougou's markets, young Africans are beginning to ask dangerous questions. If Burkina Faso can tell France to leave, why can't we? If Malema can back a leader defying the US, why are our leaders still silent? What if Africa doesn't need aid, but a clean break? The alliance between Malema and Traoré offers something few African political movements have dared to promise since the 1960s. The idea that freedom is not theoretical. It is actionable. It is possible. It is now. But make no mistake, the risks they face are enormous. History's pages are littered with the names of African leaders who dared too much, too soon. Lumumba, Sankara, Gaddafi. The same forces that destroyed them still lurk, more sophisticated, more patient, but no less determined to preserve the old order. Malema and Traoré know this. They are not naive, yet they have chosen confrontation anyway, believing that the greater risk lies in submission. This is why Malema's upcoming visit to Burkina Faso matters far more than the travel itinerary suggests. It is not just a meeting, it is a battlefield declaration. Africa will not be negotiated over. Africa will negotiate for itself. And behind that declaration lies something even deeper. Something neither leader says openly but both know well. The future of Africa will not be decided by those who once divided it. It will be decided by those willing to stand together, even when the world tells them to stand down. As Julius Malema prepares to board his plane to Ouagadougou, carrying with him not just a political message but a continental dream, one reality becomes clear. The old Africa, the Africa that bowed, that begged, that waited, is dying. And a new Africa, one that demands, that decides, that dares, is being born. If today's Africa trembles with the sounds of rebellion, It is only because the chains that once shackled it were never fully broken, only disguised. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. To understand why Julius Malema and Captain Ibrahim Traoré's alliance feels so electric and so dangerous to the old powers, you have to understand the betrayals that still bleed beneath Africa's surface. This isn't just about one country or one century. It's about a long, painful history of promises made and broken, of revolutions sparked and smothered, of a continent that fought for its freedom only to find itself trapped in new cages built by softer words and sharper tools. When colonial flags were lowered in the 20th century, Africa was promised independence. But what came instead was a cruel illusion, an independence that wore the mask of sovereignty, while foreign powers remained in control of banks, resources, militaries, and media. In places like Burkina Faso, that betrayal had a name: Thomas Sankara. Young, brilliant, and fearless, Sankara rose in the early 1980s with a vision that shook the very foundation of neocolonial control. He renamed his country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, land of upright people, and launched sweeping reforms that prioritized the poor, the farmers, and the working class over foreign companies and corrupt elites. He rejected World Bank loans, nationalized land, empowered women, and demanded that Africa stand tall without foreign crutches. And for that audacity, he was assassinated, shot down not just by internal enemies, but under the shadow of international forces that could not afford to let his ideas spread. The bullet that killed Sankara traveled faster than his dreams, but it could not kill the hunger he had awakened. Across the continent, leaders who tried to assert real independence were systematically removed, bribed, discredited, or destroyed. Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, ousted and murdered with CIA involvement. Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, overthrown while traveling abroad. Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, bombed into oblivion after building the only African-led currency reserve that could have challenged Western financial dominance. Every time Africa stood up, someone, somewhere pushed it back down. It is this bitter history that Malema and Traoré inherit. They are not stepping into uncharted territory. They are walking battlefields where the grass has grown over old blood, but the ground still remembers. And they know something crucial. The mistakes of the past were not just in confronting the empire. They were in confronting it alone. Sankara, for all his brilliance, stood isolated. Lumumba faced betrayal from neighboring African leaders who were either afraid or compromised. Gaddafi's African Union dreams died partly because the continent was too divided to rally when NATO came for him. Malema and Traoré seem determined not to repeat that fatal flaw. Their alliance is not just about mutual admiration. It is about building networks of resistance across borders before the storm comes. It's about making sure that when the next attack comes, economic, diplomatic, or even military, no African leader has to stand alone against it. This is why their connection is so unnerving to those who once dictated Africa's fate from afar. An Africa that speaks with many voices is manageable. An Africa that starts to speak with one voice, even in whispers, is a nightmare. Today's Africa is no longer the Africa of the 1960s. It is younger, more interconnected, more suspicious of foreign friendship, and far more willing to burn down broken systems if that's what it takes to build something new. When Malema boards his plane to Ouagadougou, he is carrying more than political support. He is carrying out Sankara's unfinished revolution. He is carrying Lumumba's silenced dreams. He is carrying the quiet anger of generations who watched their leaders fall and their hopes sold for cheap slogans about democracy and human rights. But history offers no guarantees. The forces that shattered Africa's first wave of independence movements have not disappeared. They have adapted, learned, and embedded themselves even deeper into the political and financial bloodstream of the continent. For Malema and Traoré to succeed where others failed, they will have to do more than resist. They will have to rethink power itself, not just seizing it, but defending it in ways that previous generations could not. They are betting that Africa has finally learned the lessons written in its scars. They are betting that this time, when the empire strikes back, it will find a continent less willing to kneel and more ready to fight. But how exactly do they plan to rebuild Africa's shattered independence? The alliance between Julius Malema and Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not just a defiant gesture. It is a carefully constructed blueprint for a new African reality, one that turns centuries of exploitation on its head. Behind the fiery speeches and the symbolic handshakes lies a radical, methodical vision to rewire Africa's destiny by rebuilding the foundations that colonialism deliberately destroyed. Their plan is not about begging for inclusion in global systems built to exclude them. It is about constructing alternative systems by Africans for Africans, unapologetically and without waiting for Western approval. And it rests on three powerful, interconnected pillars: Pan-Africanism, military sovereignty, and economic independence. For decades, Pan-Africanism was treated as a noble dream, an ideal spoken of at conferences and in textbooks, but rarely acted upon. Malema and Traoré are dragging it out of dusty speeches and planting it into the concrete realities of politics, defense, and economics. Their vision of Pan-Africanism is practical and urgent, not poetic. It demands shared political strategies across African countries, so that no leader fighting foreign interference stands alone. Unified responses to external threats, meaning if one African nation is sanctioned, the others provide immediate economic and diplomatic support. Cross-border solidarity movements among African youth, mobilizing not just governments, but entire populations against attempts at recolonization. In their blueprint, Pan-Africanism is not a philosophy. It is a weapon and a shield. It is how African nations can protect each other, trade with each other, and build together, reducing the West's centuries-old tactic of divide and conquer to dust. Traoré's swift outreach to Mali and Niger, and Malema's calls for a continental defense of Burkina Faso, are only the opening moves. They are laying the groundwork for something the world has rarely seen: an Africa that fights as one. The concept comes: military sovereignty. Both Malema and Traoré understand that no economic or political sovereignty can survive without military sovereignty. The history of Africa is littered with leaders who signed visionary policies, only to be overthrown by foreign-backed coups, mercenaries, or military interventions. In their blueprint, Africa's armies must be nationalist, not globalist. They must defend African soil, not foreign corporations or international agendas. This involves expelling foreign military bases that act as silent occupiers, monitoring and influencing African governments behind the scenes, building independent defense industries so that Africa does not depend on foreign weapons that come with political strings attached, training militaries in revolutionary loyalty, ensuring that armies are loyal to the people, not the highest foreign bidder. Traoré has already begun this process in Burkina Faso, restructuring the army, arming local defense brigades, and cutting off dependence on French and American military advisors. Malema, though outside the government for now, has been vocal in demanding that South Africa reconsider its strategic military alignments and reject AFRICOM influence. They know that the first step towards true freedom is simple but brutal. Africa must be able to defend itself with African hands, African weapons, and African will. Then comes economic independence. Perhaps the most ambitious part of their blueprint is economic. Malema and Traoré are not simply demanding higher prices for Africa's raw materials. They are demanding a total reconfiguration of how African wealth is created, stored, and circulated. Their vision includes nationalizing critical resources such as gold, uranium, oil, and rare minerals, placing them directly under state or collective African control. Developing local industries so Africa exports finished products, not raw materials. Ending the centuries-old model where Africa sends gold and receives golden trinkets. Creating independent financial institutions, such as African central banks and investment funds, to break away from the IMF and World Bank dominance. Strengthening intra-African trade, reducing the continent's dangerous over-dependence on European and American markets. In this model, Africa is no longer a mine for others. It is a continent that mines, refines, builds, and sells on its terms. This is why both men have consistently attacked the so-called aid packages from Western governments and financial institutions. They understand that aid is not generosity. It is leverage, a tool used to control political decisions, destabilize national sovereignty, and keep African nations permanently in debt. Their blueprint calls not for more partnerships with the West, but for a self-funded African renaissance, based on mobilizing Africa's own natural human and intellectual resources. It is a vision that terrifies those who have grown rich on Africa's misery, because it means Africa is no longer asking for inclusion. It is building something outside their control. Malema and Traoré are still early in this project. The walls they are trying to tear down were built over centuries, and the enemies they face are formidable. But the foundation stones have been laid. For the first time in a generation, Africa has leaders who are not trying to fit into the world as it is, but who are daring to remake the world itself. Now the question is, what does this mean for the West? For centuries, the West shaped Africa's destiny without asking Africa's permission. Now, as Julius Malema and Captain Ibrahim Traoré rise together, that old certainty is under threat, and the ripple effects are far more dangerous for the Western world than they appear at first glance. At the surface, their alliance might seem like yet another moment of African political drama, something to be observed, analyzed, and dismissed by Western think tanks and newsrooms. But underneath, it represents something much more serious. The beginning of a long overdue backlash against the system of global control that Western powers built on African exploitation. And if this movement succeeds, it will trigger consequences that will reshape the global order to the West's detriment. First and foremost, Malema and Traoré's stand is an existential threat to Western political legitimacy in Africa. For decades, Western powers operated under the carefully crafted illusion that their involvement in Africa was benevolent. They funded NGOs, sponsored elections, signed trade deals, and provided development aid, all while maintaining systems of extraction and control behind the scenes. Africa was allowed to have flags, presidents, and parliaments, but not real power. Malema and Traoré's defiance exposes that illusion. By openly rejecting Western military partnerships, economic assistance, and diplomatic pressures, they are ripping off the mask. They are showing millions of Africans, especially the youth, that the West's hand in Africa has never been about partnership. It has always been about control. If that idea spreads, if more African nations start to view the West not as saviors but as saboteurs, Western influence will crumble from the inside, without a shot fired. And Washington, Paris, London, and Brussels know it. Beyond politics, the real nightmare for the West lies in economic fallout. Much of Western economic strength rests, quietly but undeniably, on access to African resources. Minerals for smartphones and electric cars, oil and gas to power industries, gold reserves to stabilize currencies, and agricultural products to feed European markets. As we mentioned earlier, African raw materials have always flowed outward cheaply, while finished products and capital flowed inward expensively. This unbalanced system made European and American empires rich and kept African nations poor. Traoré and Malema's calls for resource nationalization, local industrialization, and intra-African trade are direct threats to that system. If even a handful of African nations successfully redirect their wealth inward, controlling their gold, their oil, and their rare earth metals, the West will face supply chain shocks, resource scarcity, and higher production costs. Western corporations that for generations treated African nations like bottomless wells will be forced to pay fair prices, or be shut out entirely. By standing boldly without Western permission, they are telling an entire generation of Africans that they owe nothing to Europe or America, that Africa's future does not need to be approved by Paris or Washington. That sovereignty is not something begged for, it is something seized. And once it spreads across the continent, once millions of Africans internalize the idea that they can govern, defend, and enrich themselves without Western oversight, no amount of sanctions, coups, or propaganda will ever rebuild the old empire. The chains will be broken in the mind, and that is where all real revolutions begin. The stakes are clear. If Malema and Traoré succeed, the West faces not just a few lost military bases or a few lost contracts. It faces a geopolitical earthquake, the loss of resource access, the crumbling of global influence, the collapse of centuries-old systems of control. For the first time since the Berlin Conference of 1884, Africa would no longer be an object of division between foreign powers. It would be a self-defined force on the world stage. That is the true fear gripping the halls of power in Washington, Paris, and London. And that is why the battle ahead, though fought on African soil, is being watched so nervously across the Western world. Because for the empire, this is not just an African rebellion, it is an existential threat. And if Africa rises, truly rises, the age of Western dominance will not end with a bang. It will end with a long, unstoppable roar from the continent it once thought it had forever tamed. Do you think these two leaders can save Africa? Let us know in the comment section. Do you think the West will try to silence them? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.